Welcome, 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 welcome to Art with Viv. It's been a while, but I'm trying to get back in the habit. Today I am going to be painting this cute little beagle in gouache. I'm doing it on my Pantone, one of those Pantone postcards, 383, with has sort of a chartreuse background. Of course, I always start with the eyes. I'm doing a nice golden brown on those eyes. And because I cannot stop doing watercolor techniques, I left the pupil open instead of painting over it. Whereas gouache, I could have painted that whole eye brown and just painted the black right over it. You can paint over gouache since it's opaque, but watercolor habits die hard. So that is why I left that open for the white of the paper, because I was going to put a highlight there. But of course, I don't have to do that with gouache. Now, the way that I like to do my gouache is I paint the eyes first. I just like to do the eyes first. And then I will go around, and wherever I see the lightest highlights from my reference photo or whatever I'm painting from, I'll paint those in. And then I like to go to my darkest darks, and that's what I'm doing here. I've gotten the lightest highlights just to begin with, and then I'm going to put in the darkest shadows of my gouache. I'm starting on his nose and getting those really dark shadows in, and I'm paying attention to the shape of the shadows so that I can, get those correct. But the most important thing is the value, the lightness or darkness of the shadows. So I'll paint those lightest highlights in and then those darkest shadows. And that gives me 2 reference points to put my midtones in. I can look at my lightest and darkest and decide what value my midtones need to be. So that's how my brain works. But now everybody does it differently. That's just how I do it. And I came back on his little nose and did some midtones, and now I'm doing his pupil. Of course, I love to do the eyes first. I want what I'm painting to look at me, though I can look him in the eye as I paint him. Putting on that dark shadow above his little eyebrow, just working on defining those eyes, putting in some of the darker darks, and then of course I'll come back and put in some of the highlights. And, work on those eyes. As I'm developing the eyes, I like to still work around the painting. So now I'm just putting in some more shadows around the ears. I'm going to put the white muzzle on. And now this is just my first layer. Once it dries, you'll still be able to see the green through it. And that's okay. That is okay, because the great thing about gouache is you can layer it. If you want that background color to shine through, you can just thin your gouache with a little bit of water. If you want it to not show through, you can just use thicker gouache and do more layers. Now, the one thing you want to be careful about with the layers is not to go too thick too fast, because gouache will crack on you if you put it too thick and don't let those under layers dry completely first. So, be careful of that. Now I'm just starting to block in some of the brown midtones around his face, and just, kind of blocking his face in a little bit of time, blocking his ears in a little bit of time, a little bit at a time. And that way I can kind of judge the lightness or darkness, and I can correct and adjust as I go if I need to darken or lighten some areas. But yeah, I like to do it in little blocks, and I work around the whole painting, just trying to keep it all sort of uniform and connected. And that's why I work around the painting but I do sometimes I do one area completely first, and it's usually the eyes. But I am not doing that on this one. I'm working around the subject, putting in those shadows, those highlights, and then trying to work out the midtones to go in between those highlights and those shadows. And of course, you want to look at your reference more than you look at your actual painting. All right. I had a beagle. I don't know if y'all like dogs. I was born with dogs. My sister got a whooping one time so bad because when I think I was about 3, maybe 4, it was cold outside and my mom worked all day and my sister was in charge of watching me. She was 7 years older than me. So I crawled into the doghouse with the dogs and went to sleep. And I was all curled up inside the doghouse with the dogs asleep, and my sister couldn't find me. My mom couldn't find me when she got home from work. My sister's like, I've lost Vivian. I don't know where she's at. I can't find her. They searched and they hollered and they called and I was in the doghouse the whole time with the dogs. And finally the dogs came out to see what all the ruckus was. And when they're tussling around, they came out and that woke me up, so I came out, and they were so relieved, but my sister got a whooping for losing me. But yeah, I just crawled on in there and went to sleep with dogs. Had dogs all my life. I had a little beagle when I was young, and I had a beagle when I was married, when I married Coop, and her name was Ellie Mae. And beagles are like the little detectives of the world, the little Snoopy dog. Snoopy is a beagle, and I love Snoopy. But they have super sniffers. If you don't know, a beagle can sniff out just about anything. They have 220 million scent receptors in that little nose. That nose is so tiny. And also those big floppy ears, that just funnels the smell up to their nose. It helps with their tracking and their scenting. And a lot of y'all don't know, but beagles have royal roots. Queen Elizabeth I, she had a pack of little miniature beagles, pocket-sized beagles, and she would put them in her saddlebags and carry them around with her, and she would let them, after she would have dinners, she would let the beagles on the table to do their little trotting around. But yeah, she loved her little beagles. They like to talk a lot, though. That was the one thing that Coop did not like about Ellie Mae. She was a talker, and she was an escape artist. She could climb a fence, and she was a small beagle. She was one of those little 13-inch beagles. But she could climb a 6-foot fence with no problem. No problem. She was something else, and he did not like that. So back to the painting. I have been working around. I put the white muzzle on. You can still see some of the green through, and that's okay, like I said. Now I'm working on some of the midtones with a sort of a grayish brown mixture for his nose. And I'm also cleaning up the highlight areas. I got some of the highlight areas a little bit too big. So I'm just taking that black, or you can use a mixture of brown and blue to make a really dark color, which is really more natural for nature. But whichever one you prefer, that's fine. It's your painting. You do what you want to do. And I am cleaning up that nose, and now I am going around his lips, getting some of those definition from his top lip to his bottom lip, kind of giving some separation. I'm also blending in some of those gray midtones across the nose and making those highlights just a tiny bit smaller by painting a little into them with my paintbrushes. And I am using a Golden Maple miniature set of paintbrushes. They're for watercolor, they're for gouache, or you can use them for acrylic. I use mine mostly for gouache, occasionally for watercolor, never for acrylic. I have a different set for my acrylic because I don't like to use the same brushes for acrylic that I use for gouache or watercolor, because it can end up messing up the brush, that acrylic, the resins in the acrylic paint. So I never use any of my brushes that I use for watercolor or gouache for acrylic. Or oil, for that matter. They have a different set of brushes as well for my oil painting, which I haven't done in years. But I'm thinking about it. I got a set. I just haven't cracked it open and started. So now I am paying attention to where some darker shadows are. So I'm going in with a nice deep sienna color and getting those shadows under the eyes, across his eyebrow, and then coming in with a little bit of a mid-tone brown, just a little bit of yellow or white mixed in with that brown to lighten it up, and hitting those highlights around his eyes. And you know, the lights and darks, that's what makes sure your subject look three-dimensional. You're trying to get that three-dimensional effect on a two-dimensional piece of paper. And the way that you do that is through value. And value just means the lightness or darkness of, an area or a shadow or an object or whatever. And the good thing about gouache is it's very forgiving. You can paint light over dark, dark over light. You can blend it, or you can do hatch marks. A lot of people, I love to watch some artists paint, and what they do is they just do it, layer hatch marks of color. And I don't mean cross hatching, I mean just lines. They'll just do paint strokes of color, let that dry, do another color over that, and let that first layer shine through, and it blends and it's beautiful. And I may try that one time, but I blend mine while it's still wet, just using the tip of my brush, blending the colors together. That's just how I do it. Now I'm going to go ahead and put a darker gray, although it looks pretty light here, but it's my first layer on his ear. His ear is black with some brown shining through it. It's got a brown top and it's got a brown edge, but the bulk of it, the mid part of his ear, is black with some brown shining through it, if that makes sense. It's a mixture of black and brown fur. So I'm going to go ahead and get that brown edge on first. I did that first layer of sort of a gray. It was really watery, so a lot of the green of the background is shining through, and that's fine because, again, we are going to layer it. Layer, layer, layer. I love it. And you see the black that I put, or the dark mixture that I put for his shoulders, once it dried, it looked gray and the green is shining through. But again, we're going to layer it. We're going to do thin layers. We're going to let the layers dry in between so that we don't get a crack. We don't want them to crack if it gets too thick. So now I'm putting a little bit more of that gray. I'm also putting in some on the other ears. Now I let all of that dry. I am coming back in with that dark mixture and just sort of defining some of the lips and everything. And then I'm coming over that. It looks really light on the ear, and it looked really dark on his lips, but it is a darker mixture. It's just the way that the light is hitting it, and it's making it look shiny, so it makes it look lighter than it actually is. And I'm just doing tiny little brush strokes that look like fur. Always remember, when you're painting some fur, you want it to your brush strokes to go in the direction that the fur is actually growing so that it looks natural. And once this dries, it will look a lot darker. It looks very light here, but a lot of that is just the way that my studio is set up and the way that the light is hitting that. It's making it look lighter than that color actually is. It is actually a mid-tone, almost black, kind of a charcoaly gray. And once it dries, it'll be darker. And I'm just doing that in just little tiny strokes. Now it's dry. You can see that it looks almost black. Now I'm coming with some white, and I am hitting the really bright highlights here on his under chin. I want to keep that one shadow, pretty dark, because shadows recede, which means they look like they're going away from you. And of course, highlights make things look like they're coming forward. So that's why I'm putting the highlights on like the edges of his little neck wrinkles and on his chin, and wherever the light is really hitting his body strongly, I'm putting more white there. And I'll probably have to do another layer as well, because the thing about this gouache is, or my gouache that I'm working with, it's a whole bean gouache, is once it dries, it does look a little duller and a little darker than it does when it's wet. So I will probably have to do another layer of highlights, which is fine. I like layering, getting it just right. But right now I'm just trying to hit the very lightest areas where the sun or the light is just bouncing off of him. But I'm trying to keep that shadow under his neck, on his little chest. Keep it fairly dark. We don't want it to go too light, because then it'll look wrong, because it will come toward us, and we don't want that. It'll look unnatural. So you got to be mindful of your shadows, mindful of how light or dark they are when you're painting. I love his little chin. It's like little dogs' chins, and that little gusset, their little neck, or whatever that's called, their little wrinkly neck. It feels like velvet when you pet it, and I just love it. Love it, love it, love it. I'm coming back to his ears with a lighter brown. And I am just doing the highlights. And I'm doing just tiny little strokes, letting some of that base color shine through. And that gives it its mottled look. Because his ear looks brown and black, like it's mottled together. I don't know the correct word. Speckled, mottled, I don't know. Highlighting some more of the brown. And again, I'm making sure my strokes are going the way that his fur is growing on his ear. Hitting some more of those highlights just to give it a little shine, give it a little shape, give it a little shimmer. Give it a little shimmer. We like a little shimmer on our puppy's ears. But I do know that when it's dry, it'll be dull. Now I am just coming back and blending some of that nose, some of those midtones with the gray. They got a little dark, so I was lightening them up with just a little bit of a lighter gray. And again, now that I have basically the puppy painted, I'm just kind of comparing my lights and darks so that I know where I need to make my adjustments, where I need to go a little bit lighter. You look at your reference photo. Make sure you look at your reference as, more than you even paint. So I'm looking at that. I'm seeing where it's even lighter in the reference than I have painted it. So I'm making adjustments there. And with, everything down, I have something to compare to. I have the darkest darks that I can compare to and say, oh, well, this needs to be a shade lighter because it's too close to this dark, or it needs to be a shade darker because it's too close to the highlight. So that's one thing you want to be doing the whole time you're painting, is assessing how light or how dark your tones are, your shapes and your shadows. And that's all it is. It's about painting the shapes and getting them in the right space and getting them in the right tone, value, darkness, lightness, whatever you want to say. Its value is tone, lightness, or darkness of something. And that's all it is. Now I am just doing some little speckles. He's got little tiny fine white hairs on his upper lip. So I'm just putting some of those in. Right around the edge of his lip, you can see them really well. So I'm just using my little miniature brush and just making those tiniest of hairs. And that just really adds a lot. That brings it to life. Those little tiny details that you can see, that really brings your paintings to life. So pay attention to those. Look really closely. I'm just going to come in here and add a few more speckles to his ear. I'm not quite satisfied with it, but from this angle you can see how the black and the brown is sort of mottled together. It's just sort of blended together with some brown spots shining through, some of the black shining through. And I really like that effect. It looks really nice. And it looks a lot like the reference photo. Now, I'm not trying to paint the reference photo as an exact copy, and I don't think you should either. You should paint what you see, what you feel like is important. You might want to play up his nose. You might want to play up his eyes. You might want to play up his ears. So you paint your painting and do it the way that it feels right for you. I'm just showing you how I do it, but everybody does it differently. You can have a bunch of painters paint the same subject, and it's going to look different from painter to painter, because everybody sees things differently and everybody has a different technique. Everybody's strokes are different. Their hand is different. The way that they apply paint is different. And that is what makes art so beautiful and so complex and wonderful and rich. So now I am just putting tiny little white dots on his nose. Well, they're really kind of a light gray. You know how dogs' noses have that texture? So I'm just getting that texture in there, adding a few highlights that I kind of lost along the way, just putting those back in, just those tiny little highlights. And down his little lip, across the back of his ear, there's some light shining, so I want to get that. And I'm just using this sort of thinned down white. It's not really thick. It's a little thinned down with some water, and I'm just putting those highlights where I see those on, and a few highlights here and there, and I'm pretty much finished. I just can't stop, won't stop, can't stop. I'm just keep painting, but I am pretty close. I could have stopped like 5 minutes ago and it would have been a fine painting. There wouldn't have been anything wrong with it, but no, I have to keep on fooling with it because I don't know when to stop. But I think it looks pretty good, just adding some highlights so that that ear shapes up a little better. And I think he's pretty much done. I think he's done. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it, and I hope to get back on track and get some more of these videos out to you soon.